Welcome to the April 25th, 2022 meeting of the Sandusky City Commission. We'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Meinzer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
We come together today asking for guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin our meeting. Help us engage in meaningful discussion and allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of the community. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Myers, we follow the roll.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Here.
Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Meinzer?
Here.
Mr. Poole?
Here.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of April the 11th, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move that we accept the minutes of the April 11th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Any residents with comments regarding tonight's agenda, please step to the podium, share with us your name and address on your agenda item.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 5th Street. I'd like to talk about item, I believe it's 8, the Crimus Market Street Collector. There's legislation tonight taking them out of the opportunity zone. I'd like to have an explanation of that and why you're doing that. That's unusual, to take something away from a project. They can't seem to get this project off the ground here, and I think the city owes it to us tonight to explain where this project is right now. There was a gentleman came up here a few months ago explaining some things about that project, and I was very concerned about what I was hearing from a taxpayer because he did some research on this. And then I find out later on there's been another event. Back in August of 2021, there was a failure for them to pay their property taxes. And we had a local developer come to the rescue and pay $25,000 to catch them up on their property taxes. I'm very concerned about the grant that we have out for them. We have a $139,000 grant pending for this project. And when they're behind in their taxes, they're not eligible for that grant. But they cheated and had somebody else pay their taxes. So that person who paid the taxes, I want to know how involved he is in this project. We need to know that. Also, the vendors are being asked, when they set up shop in this project, if they ever do, that they have to put up $75,000. That's a lot of money to put up. And I think the city should disclose maybe some financial problems with this project to these vendors, because they're going to lay out $75,000. So I don't know what all is going on here, but maybe you could clear it up tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. Larry Fletcher, resident, 13 Twin Oaks, Milan, and here tonight as president of Shores and Islands, Ohio, formerly Lake Erie Shores and Islands. Just to mention a couple things regarding your agenda item about House Bill, Ohio House Bill 563, not to take a stand, but just to provide some information that might be valuable to you. When this bill was first introduced, I started receiving calls the afternoon of the introduction of the bill from some municipalities in both Erie and Ottawa County, representatives of townships, and cities expressing some concern, making sure I knew about it and what did I know about it. And so I quickly looked into it. And then I felt that, we should make sure that all the municipalities that have any level of vacation rental in Erie and Ottawa County knew about this. So I picked up the phone and got on the email and started that information campaign. And especially in areas that have heavy tourism bases like we do, I found that that was going on, around the state as well with my counterparts. So what I heard back as I researched this more and then asked for those opinions from the different municipalities, I didn't hear back from all of them, but I did hear back from 7 who took formal action, sent me either letters or email communications of what they had discussed in their sessions like yours. Those 7 were Perkins Township, City of Vermilion, Village of Kelly's Island, Village of Marblehead, Put-in-Bay Township, Catawba Township, and Danbury Township, all opposing this bill as it was written based on the fact that it takes away that local control. So I provided that information to the Ohio Convention and Visitors Bureau Association because they speak on our behalf in Columbus, and they have folks that do talk to our legislators about different bills. And so I provided that information to them. The executive director of the CVB Association, took that information along with others that he had collected, and he presented at the opposition committee hearing on this bill. I believe that was March 22nd. The Danbury Township zoning inspector, Kathy Dale, also went down to Columbus to provide that opposition testimony. And so far, we can't find really any municipalities that are firmly in support of this as written, other than in the communities that the proponents launch. But those happen to be areas that don't have this saturation of vacation rental that we do. So certainly we have a lot of vacation rentals in Erie and Ottawa County. We certainly appreciate that lodging tax that comes in from those. And I know that the properties take advantage of the promotion that we offer. But we don't think, and this is what the CVB Association felt as a whole across the state and formally voted to oppose this bill, as it was written, that we should take that control away from the local municipalities to decide how they're going to regulate their vacation rentals. So that's what I have for you tonight, and happy to answer any questions or provide other information. Now,
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Item number 7, which is the permission to bid the 2022 sidewalk repair and replacement program. A couple of items. Number 1, the $112,000, is that for only sidewalks in the public right-of-way where the sidewalk was damaged from the wrong type tree that was planted? And number 2, $112,000 seems to be an awful low amount. That's not going to be doing too many sidewalks. And if you recall, a couple of former commissioners that just got off the commission here recently advocated for a public-private partnership whereby residents and the city would share 50-50 in cost for any sidewalks that have nothing to do with damage from the boulevard trees, but if it's just a bad sidewalk in front of their house. We've got a record budget this year. We've got $18 million from the federal government. That's something that maybe as the year goes by, we can look at putting more money into the sidewalk program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwanger. Any residents like to speak on agenda item? Now we'll turn to our first order of business tonight is the swearing in of police officers. Mr. Wobser?
They're sworn in, sir. I just wanted to bring them down and introduce them to the commission. There are 2 newest full-time officers. Step on up. Officer Lisa Lacer and Officer Brian Torres. you remember, you've met them both before. They've been reserve officers for our department for, Officer Torres probably started July time of last year, and Officer Lacer sometime October of last year. So she was recently sworn in a couple weeks ago. She started her field training program, and Officer Torres was sworn in last week by the city manager, and he's just started his field training program. We just want him to come in and introduce themselves. Say something if you want to, or say hi, but they're here, they're ready to start working. We're looking forward to watching them succeed in their careers, so we're pretty excited.
Pressure's on.
Yep, there's no going back.
I'm Lisa Lacer. Glad to be here from Port Clinton. Looking forward to starting my career here with the city.
I'm Brian Torres. Just recently moved into the city from the Cleveland area, North Olmsted. And it's a great police department to be working for, a lot of great people on it.
Thank you both for accepting this role and taking these positions and really taking a chance on us. And I think this is, I always view this as a two-way street. It really has to work for both of us. We take your employment very seriously, and I know that you do also. We just ask that you continue in the tradition that this department has established over the years and continue as they all have to make us proud. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have 4 items on our consent agenda this evening. Item A is a second reading and will not require a motion. Do any of you wish to move any of these consent items to the regular agenda?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
could you move item A down?
Item A will go to the regular agenda, will be our first item. Ms. Myers, we present the consent agenda less item A.
Yes, Mr. President. Item B, MPO grant funding applications. Item C, purchase 2 replacement Life Pack 15 heart monitors. Item D, disposal of outdated ballistic panels to Ohio Governor's Office for Ukraine.
Commissioners, having heard these ordinances and resolutions, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I make a motion to accept the current agenda items B, C, and D, and declaring that all ordinances and/or resolutions as drafted and presented to the City Commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with section reflected in the ordinances and/or resolutions, whether it be in accordance with section 13 or 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, we call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Now on the ordinances and resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Those ordinances and resolutions are passed. Turn to our regular agenda with item A being the first item, Ms. Myers.
It is requested an ordinance be passed amending Part 7 Business Regulation Code, Chapter 735, Public Vendors of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Sandusky in a manner and way specifically set forth here and below, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I move for the passage of this ordinance on second reading.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second discussion. No,
Yeah, Mr.
I don't
Chairman.
think we need a motion on that. It's a second reading.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole.
I'd like to add an amendment to this under Section 375.04 under fees. Add to the end of that, this is specified by the annual vendor program, provided by the Division of Planning and approved by the City Commission. And approved by the City Commission, I like added to the end of that paragraph. We should approve the, any fees that, we should approve the fees.
So, Mr. Poole, if I understand you correctly, you would like to amend this legislation to simply add the fees established must be approved by the City Commission.
Correct.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion.
Point of order. Can I just make sure I understand where this language is being added? Is it you said it so quickly, 735.04?
Yes, fees.
Thank you.
Just to explain why I think you do that, we approve fees for just about every other service that we provide. This is an annual fee, which means that it's not really a burden for us to look at it, and the public expects us, and we're responsible for what the fees are. And I just think it should just stay in line with what we do with all the other fees. There's no reason to change this to it. We don't want the fees changing midterm without us knowing about it. We're the overseer of how things should be done, and we should at least know why fees are changing. And the only way you can do that is if we ask it to be, it's brought back to us. We represent, the public's going to want to know if a fee changes between the time that the beginning of the year, the middle. We need to be able to at least be able to answer the question and justify a fee change.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner.
I wonder if Mr. Poole might be open to a further modification of the motion to provide that would, instead of coming to the commission on an annual basis, it would come to the commission from time to time as amended.
I'm not sure what that means.
Well, if it changes,
Oh, if it changes,
Yeah.
if that's what it means, yes. Yes, thank you.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Been a motion and a second to amend Mr. Poole's amendment.
I can withdraw my original amendment. Will that simplify this? Where's the lawyer?
He's remote today.
Unfortunately, we don't have a lawyer tonight.
Okay, well, that's fine.
I think amending your amendment is
That's fine.
And Ms. Myers, if you call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Through the commission president, just Director Heil is here tonight. He's just remote.
Oh, he's on Teams.
Yeah. So
Mr. Heil, can you give us your take on amending an amendment, or should we, is Mr. Poole okay with recalling his amendment and allowing Mr. Murray's amendment to stand?
Either is technically acceptable. It might be easier to withdraw it and then state it as one motion so that we can properly.
Allow Mr. Poole to withdraw his motion, and Mr. Murray's has made a motion, and that motion has been seconded. Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on that amendment?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That motion passes, and that piece of legislation is amended. We'll return to the piece of legislation for discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
I'm just confused a little bit about, it doesn't seem like this is that big a deal. I just was wondering what the benefits of staff, and I see Ms. Blair not here tonight, so.
Yes.
She's
maybe
there.
Mr. Wood-
She's in the
Oh,
back.
she's in the back? Oh, yeah, hi. Is this just something that's more efficient? Does it generate more revenue? I don't understand why the city would prefer it to be as documented here in the ordinance, or why there's an opposition, what the benefits are of setting it as a commission. If you can answer.
Thank you. So you're asking about the fees again?
I'm just curious. I don't have much insight into the vendor application. Do you get complaints? Are there vendors that feel slighted or that there's some bias against, or is there?
I think the biggest context is that the pier is such a new space, it's in high demand. So last year, it was back and forth, like one vendor was paying per event to come on a Thursday nights, where others had reserved a space all year. We also formally didn't allow utility hookups. So what we've talked about with Public Works and with Finance Department this year is to do probably a quarterly utility payment for vendors that work out how to hook up to utilities with us if they want to. And we don't know if we're going to make our best guess to have the lowest amount of fee to cover the electricity, or at least not lose too much. And then we'll monitor it really closely this year. And then next year we'll be able to charge more reasonable, like what that we know that electricity costs us, for example, to allow vendors to operate on the pier and use the electricity. So I'm pretty confident we're going to need to change them next year after what we learned this year, and for us to come back every year, it's a lot. Although, to Mr. Poole's comment, Commissioner Poole's comment, just bringing you our draft fees and having you approve them is not a huge burden on the staff, if that's the direction that you'd like to go.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, so really, this isn't a big moneymaker for the city of Sandusky?
Oh, not at all. No,
And we're not excluding any vendors from coming into the city if they pay their fair share of electricity and water. And three, I remember from the first reading, I think that there is an appeal process through the planning commission if they feel slighted, correct? If somebody feels aggrieved that they can go to the planning and.
I would have to check on
Wasn't that
that.
part of the first reading? I thought it was, maybe they were wrong.
That's been verified. Thank you.
Okay,
Chair.
well, thank you, I'm fine. I'm fine with
We
you,
would,
I guess.
and again, I say this last time through the Commission President, Commissioner Meinzer, we wanted to make it easier for vendors to operate in the city. We want to reduce the fees overall, and that's been a leading charge of redrafting the program.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, to address Commissioner Meinzer's question, that is addressed in section 735.06. There is an appeal permitted to the city manager, and that can then in turn be appealed to the planning commission.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to add that I did sit down with Ms. Blair relative to this, relative to the changes that she made, and as the liaison to the planning department, and she went over all those changes with me. And this came about in order to clean all that up. So the fees are just one part of the things that were cleaned up in that document. I think they did a nice job.
Thank you, Mr. John. As this is the second reading, we do not need a vote on the motion. I'll ask Ms. Myers to call the roll on that ordinance.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present the next item on the agenda?
It is requested an ordinance be passed declaring a 1979 Ford 3600 tractor as unnecessary and unfit for the city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a new Kubota L-Series diesel tractor from Strucker Tractor Sales Incorporated of Fremont, Ohio, through the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Horticulture Division, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
we're obviously replacing a number of pieces of equipment tonight. It's sort of like the Sandusky car show. But some of these, this one in particular is old enough to go into the Henry Ford Museum when we're finished with it. But I do want to point out, and I'm just going to say this in connection with this piece of legislation, I won't repeat this comment, but, we have, and we've talked about this before, that, we had good reviews from the public generally when we dealt with the major snowstorm that we had, and it's because we had good equipment. And the good equipment builds good morale, and it provides good service. And, I think we all recall going through the leaf picking up season, and I don't recall a lot of complaints about that. Again, I think it's because we've had better equipment out there. We need to keep investing in our equipment. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, we have not had a vehicle repurchase program in about 30 years. And the fact that we're getting to this now, these are significant dollars, but these are hard assets. They will last for a long time to come. And we'll be leaving we as a commission will be leaving the city in a much better place than we found it by making sure that the people who do the work have the tools they need to do the work. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 2.
It is requested an ordinance be passed declaring a 1989 Case 385 tractor as unnecessary and unfit for city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a new Avant 640 articulated loader from KTS Equipment LLC of Wellington, Ohio, through the U.S. General Services Administration Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Horticulture Division, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, I wonder if you could explain to the commission and the viewing public what articulated means.
I don't know that.
Through the commission president, I'd have
This
to
is a tough
defer to,
question.
I'd have to defer to Mr. Poole. I don't know what articulated means.
In other words, you will defer to Mr. Poole.
Yes.
Mr. Poole,
Don't
can you
do
share
that
with us
to-
what you think articulated means?
I think it means that it can.
Accordion-like.
What exactly is that you're doing with your hands?
It means that the body moves.
It's an articulating boom. It means it has an elbow on it.
Elbow, yeah, it moves.
Could go in a lot of directions.
Either, there you go, exactly.
down, sideways,
Articulate means it
Got it.
moves.
Very, very important. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed and we are articulating. Ms. Myers, you present item number 3, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed declaring a 2000 GMC G3500 utility van is unnecessary and unfit for city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a new 2022 Ford 4x4 Super Duty F-250 regular cab from Valley Truck Centers of Cleveland, Ohio, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program for the wastewater treatment plant, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Myers. Commissioner Harris.
I'll move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
looking at these purchases, I'm really surprised. I know you got a truck like myself, just a regular Ford Chevy truck, you're spending over $50,000 now. So I think these are 4x4 Super Duty F-250s, and the next one's the same thing. I think that pricing's really good that we got from that Valley.
I agree with you, Commissioner Waddington. Mr. Klein and I had this discussion this morning, and when you don't buy equipment for 25 or 30 years, you tend to have sticker shock. That truck 25, 30 years ago was probably $15,000, $20,000. Now it's $75,000. And a lot of it has to do with the equipment that is outfitted on that truck for use in municipal services. So it is a value for the dollar, and we are blessed by having the ability to purchase through the state program that guarantees that we're not getting put away on the price. So they're big dollars, but long time between purchases justifies that. Additional comments or questions? Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the ordinance, please.
Yes. Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present the next item on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a 2022 Ford 4x4 Super Duty F-250 regular cab from Valley City Truck Centers of Cleveland, Ohio, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Sewer Maintenance Division, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meisner?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under Section 14 of City Charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Byers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present the next item on our agenda.
Yes, Mr. President. It is requested an ordinance be passed declaring a 1991 GMC G3500 as unnecessary and unfit for city use pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase a new 2022 Ford F-450 chassis from the Valley Truck Centers of Cleveland, Ohio, through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program for the Streets and Traffic Division, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call a roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present the next item on our agenda.
It is requested a resolution be passed opposing the passage of House Bill 563 by the Ohio General Assembly, which usurps municipalities' home rule authority to regulate short-term rentals, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murphy?
I think the resolution largely speaks for itself, but for folks at home to know what the premise is, it's largely based upon the fact that, we organize as a city so that we can set our own rules. And among the most important of those rules are zoning rules. And this just tramples on those home rule rights, and it just would be wrong-headed. I did happen to run into our state representative a couple of weeks ago, and he indicated that a lot of communities were doing the same thing and urged that we do this as well. Thought that the legislation was dead on arrival, but I think it's important that we pass this anyway.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Just a question, Mr. Murray, you're better versed than I. For the public, why does this damage us, and what in specific are they trying to do at the state?
Mr. Chairman.
If you will, if you can.
This basically would allow transit rental everywhere all the time, and would override local zoning rules.
Okay, thank you. And that's exactly it, which is why it's important for us to pass this. Those kinds of Airbnbs are a city problem that we should be able to manage. The cities and municipalities should be able to determine how it affects their particular municipality and shouldn't be dictated by the state, which is the reason that why I oppose this.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? As far as you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 7, please.
It is requested a resolution be passed declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed 2022 sidewalk repair and replacement project, approving the specifications and engineer's estimate of cost thereof, and directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioners?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murray?
I would like to reiterate, some things we've talked about before with respect to this legislation. It is Ohio law that homeowners are responsible for their own sidewalks. But we, as a community, got into a spot where we had sidewalks that really needed some catching up, and we've been doing that, and I think we need to continue doing that for a while. At some point, it will be appropriate, I think, as we begin to get more caught up, to ask that the residents have a kind of a shared responsibility for that, as they do in every other community around us. This is an unusual program, so I support it. I support this legislation, but I think that out there, someplace on the horizon, there's a time to return to a little bit more of a normal mix.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington?
probably 4 or 5 years ago, Mr. Brady, we went out when we had several complaints, and I think it was fairly close, just south of 500,000, maybe like 460,000, that we went out and repaired. A lot of it, I think, has been identified. I'm on the tree commission by a lot of trees that heave up the sidewalks. So that should be, I agree somewhat what you're saying, Mr. Murray, with the shared responsibility down the road. Drive approaches and that we have done, and they put it on your taxes. So that's something to look at so we can keep up and not fall so far behind. So I agree with that.
I agree. I think that the concept is a good one. We have been fortunate enough going, and I think you're referring, Mr. Waddington, to the Waverly Road, Marlboro area where sidewalks were heaved 4 or 5 inches out of the ground, and you not only couldn't walk down them, you couldn't ride a bike down them. And we were fortunate enough to put together almost $500,000 for sidewalk repair and tree removal. And are we always going to be able to do that? Absolutely not. But for this brief moment in time, I believe we can afford to do it. And we're not changing the law here. We just are dipping a little more into our pocket instead of the residents' pocket. So I certainly support that.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
I would add that we're the ones that caused the sidewalk to heave by somebody putting in an inappropriate tree, 20, 30 years ago, whenever that was. I mean, that should be on our dime. I don't have a problem with that.
That has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
and
Meinzer?
just to touch on what Mr. Waddington said about the tax, I remember when we actually had a full-time sidewalk inspector.
Right.
And he would go around and mark the bad sections, and we would probably had to sell bonds to cover it, but we would put it on the tax for the property, and it would spread the payments out over 20 years and make it easier on the homeowner to pay for it. I mean, is that something that happens in Ohio anymore, or is that something, I don't know if that would fly or not, but that's going back probably 40 years.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
I can address Mr. Meinzer's question. Yes, that still happens. Cold Creek is a pretty good example a recent example of that, where we did it on a much larger scale. That was put on the taxes. We did sell bonds to support those, and we didn't get all the payments that were being made, of course, because of the default. And eventually, we'll get those back as the property is sold.
Thanks.
So yeah, it still happens quite regularly.
Just to kind of wonder, I think I read somewhere, and perhaps you and I had this discussion earlier today, if you can share with us the footage of sidewalks, number of trees we're talking about in this. The question was asked by a resident regarding the $112,000, and I wonder if you can address how many pieces of sidewalk or how many feet that gets us.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. So this is just over 2,000 feet of sidewalk. And in the agenda item, it does show under 10,000 square feet with a 4-foot width on the sidewalk. That's just over 2,000 linear feet. We're also doing curb in here. There's about 127 linear feet of curb, damaged curb at various locations. One of the key locations that we're looking at is in front of the Rieger. It's really bad over there where they're loading and unloading residents. So as part of this project, we're not only addressing sidewalks that are being heaved by trees. This project is looking at a list that we've been accumulating from call-ins from residents over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So we are addressing those, most of the older ones on there and some of them that are on city properties as well. So it's not, we're also not using money, that $500,000 program from 2017, I believe it was, also removed some of those trees. We're not doing that as part of this program. We're doing that in-house now. If the tree needs removed or we're grinding the roots out, we're not actually taking trees out as part of this program. So that $112,000 goes straight into the concrete.
Thanks, Mr. Klein. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call the roll on that, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Wantington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Wantington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 8, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed removing parcels from the existing Central Public Improvement Tax Increment Financing Area referred to as the Downtown TIF by amending Ordinance 18-085 and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Which one?
I move the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Holliday, I believe we have a question from a resident regarding this specific piece of legislation.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Just to respond to the comments and questions of the resident, first of all, this item will not adjust the boundaries of the Opportunity Zone. That's a separate federal program. This is just looking at the downtown TIF area. It's not unusual for TIF boundaries to be adjusted. In fact, last year when we created the Hography TIF, we also at that time amended the boundaries of the downtown TIF. So this will not be the first time that we're amending the boundaries of the downtown TIF. And the other main point I wanted to make is that this does not change the amount of funding that we're providing directly into the Crimus redevelopment project. We are taking the Crimus property out of the downtown TIF, but we're not changing our commitment to the redevelopment of the Crimus property. Our commitment to the redevelopment of that property is coming from our Issue 8 Economic Development Fund grants. I believe our grant amount that's been committed to that project is $135,000, of which not a single dollar has been released. That project was stalled during the pandemic. Fortunately, the developer has begun some demolition work to prepare that property for redevelopment, and the developer is working hard to put together the remaining financing to start with the full redevelopment, but we have not released any of our Economic Development Fund grant dollars to that project. I can't speak to the taxes, the tax payment on that property that was made. I do know that that developer's working with a variety of partners in terms of the financing, but I can't speak to the specific payment of taxes related to that property. Certainly before we release any of our Economic Development Fund grants, we will ensure that that property is current on its taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Wantington? Mr. Harris?
Just to be on the safe side, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to abstain from this, please.
Duly noted.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance, please.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Wantington? Mr. Harris?
Abstain.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed with one abstention. As far as you present item number 9, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and approving a grant in the amount of $22,500 through the Economic Development Fund Program to the Paper Street Holdings LLC in relation to the property located at 603 Columbus Ave and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. I understand that the developer, Mr. Besh, is here with us today, and if you'd like to say a few words and explain the project, you're welcome to step to the microphone. I know you're passionate about this project.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're looking forward to continuing this project. I stopped by one of the units on my way home from work, and it's about 85% done. It's looking really good. I am pretty excited about it. We were able to get the, conditional use for this project through some thorough reading of the city ordinance and code, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but yeah, certainly, Mr. Brady.
My understanding is this project is going to be evolving, that this is hopefully just the start of a kind of reclaiming the building that's sat empty now for a while. A very good friend of mine who owned it for several years, Mr. George Gilbert, a stalwart person in our community, and he would be proud of the fact that it's being renovated right now. My understanding is you're going with 2 or 3 transient rentals for now in hopes of gaining more momentum.
Yes, sir. Actually, a comment made to me was Mr. Gilbert rolling over his grave if he saw what he was doing. I said, Mr. Gilbert would be rolling over in his grave if he saw the disrepair that the building had fallen into. So I think that's a true testament to what we're doing. Yeah, we got approval for 4 units. We're doing 3 right now. That whole project's about, 50-55% done. We're making a big push. We'd like to be welcoming guests for Memorial Day and Bike Week, certainly. If not in all 3, at least 1 or 2 of those. The 4th unit we would look to renovate over next winter. This is just on Madison Street on the wing. The main part of the building we'd like to keep commercial. We currently have the upstairs in the main building occupied by commercial tenants, some professionals, IT, insurance, home inspection place. We do have 2,000 or so square feet available. We've talked to a few interested parties. Most would look at an investment of 100,000 or more to renovate that space into something modern and usable. We've talked to a bakery, we've talked to some more insurance type companies, but yeah, it would be another large investment. We've got close to 300,000 being invested. Now we're anticipating over the next 2 to 5 years, double or triple that to bring that building back up to spec.
Excellent. Comments or questions for Mr. Beck?
Mr. Chairman, just so we provide some context for the folks at home, this is a former bank building at the Columbus of Madison and Columbus. I can't remember what the bank was, though.
City loan.
City loan, thank you.
And my recollection is, although it was a bank in the commercial space, there was a host of, I want to say, doctor's offices down the side back in the day when doctor's offices and examining rooms were about this wide.
Yes.
There was 3, yep. The 3,000 square foot wing was, I think Mr. Gilbert built that after the original bank sold. He purchased the property from the original bank, and he built that for medical professionals. I believe there's a dentist, a chiropractor, and other medical professionals in there. But that is the 3,000 square feet that we're developing into approximately 900 square foot each, and some utility space for
I know you have plenty of parking.
We have plenty of parking, yes. One argument we don't have to have.
Additional comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole?
Yes, that was a doctor's office. I was there. I had used it there. My doctor was in those offices. I just want to say that transient rental does not work everywhere, but your plan is very well designed, and that will be an asset to that area. So thank you for doing this. It was doing a good job.
Thank you. We're not rookies to this space either. We've been doing this for doing transient rentals for 5 years. We have the most reviewed property in the city of Sandusky with 4.9 out of 5 stars. You city commissioners know you can't make everybody happy all the time. We have 600 reviews overall. This will be units 5, 6, and 7 for us. And then the additional would be unit 8.
Excellent. Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Wantington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Wantington?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed, and thank you, Mr. Besch, for you and your partners investing in our city. That concludes our agenda. We'll now turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President Brady, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with the donations. First, $100 donation to the K-9 account was received from Ohio APCO. I'd ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Second, a thank you to the students and families of Sandusky Central Catholic for their generous donation of $450 to contribute to the purchase of 3 Crimson King maples that were planted on Decatur Street on Earth Day. Commissioner Waddington was able to attend that along with members of the Tree Commission, and the Public Works team did a really great job working with students to bring those plantings to the edge of their campus. I'd ask for a motion to approve that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Then a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks.
And next, the City of Sandusky Recreation Division would like to thank OHM Advisors for the donation of their services for the design of the Safety Town streetscape for behind Mill School, the new location for Sandusky Rec. The donation of $2,500 to $3,000 will include the design and layout of the proposed Safety Town. And I actually have some renderings of that I'll pass down for the commissioners to look at. And John Lippis of OHM is here and would like to say a couple of words before you pass. Oh, I thought you were planning on saying something. Is that right? Yeah, go ahead, John. Yep.
I'm glad you all have the renderings passing around, but Mayor, members of the commission, on behalf of OHM Advisors, I'd like to express our excitement at the opportunity to provide the in-kind services of planning and design for the new Safety Town at Mill School. Our organization is committed to advancing communities, and we couldn't think of a better way to show that than to provide this opportunity for the youth of Sandusky. We look forward to working with the city staff on the continued design and layout of the street grid for this project, and we hope that we can provide our kids a safe community and a safe training educational course within our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lippis. Safety Town has such a long history in this city. Mr. Murray would like to represent the fact that when I went to Safety Town, they had horses and buggies. That's not the case.
I think it's self-evident.
Self-evident. So could we do a motion to pass that donation?
So moved.
Accept. Sorry.
And a second discussion? Without objection, motion be approved. And hearing no objection, we're passing that.
Thanks, John. For administration, I'd like to request a motion to affirm Abby Bemis to the Economic Development Incentive Committee. Her appointment will run through December 31st, 2023. She has served in the past as a voting and non-voting member of that committee.
Second.
Motion and a second. Without objection, motion be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. Moving on to police, the Sandusky Police Department recently applied for grant funding to assist with the recruitment and retention of police officers through the Office of Criminal Justice Services, or OCJS. The grant was time sensitive. The application process opened after the most recent commission meeting. All applications had to be submitted by today's date. A formal communication with more information related to the grant will be forthcoming, but I'd like to ask for a motion to approve that application.
So moved.
Got a motion and a second. Discussion? Without objection, that motion be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Great. Moving on to Public Works, the traveling water screen at Big Island is in need of repairs and partial replacement. The bar screen purpose is to remove debris from the 42-inch raw water intake and to prevent damage to the pumps, valves, and other equipment at the facility. Water plant crews noticed issues with the operation of the screen in January and immediately contacted Evoqua Water Technology LLC to conduct an extensive inspection. The inspection report showed that the entire water screen assembly is in poor shape and does not sit properly on the rails. A temporary repair cost was given of nearly $50,000, but there's not a guarantee that additional parts would not fail. Staff is in agreement with replacing the screen assembly and would like approval to procure a replacement water screen assembly on an emergency basis for up to $240,000, including removal and installation. Staff has multiple quotes still under evaluation, and legislation will be prepared for the next city commission. The traveling water screen assembly system needs to be operational and reliable in order to supply water to the citizens of Sandusky. Do we need a motion on that? Could we get a motion to, we'll come back formally.
Got a motion and a second, discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved.
Thank you. So there are several major sewer, water, and street projects taking place throughout the city. Please respect the lives of our construction workers trying to improve infrastructure in the community and be mindful of work zones. A map of all road closures and detours is available on the city's website and updated weekly. Specific project-related updates continue to be provided to affected stakeholders. Also, asphalt plants are now open for the 2022 season. All are encouraged to report potholes to the city by calling 419-627-5829. And residents are also welcome to drop off yard waste free of charge at Barnes Nursery, 1630 Camp Road in Huron on Saturday, May 7th and Sunday, May 8th. For community development, the city's received a request to support the issuance of a DF5 liquor permit for the waterfront restaurant and bar development project proposed by Pipe Creek Wharf LLC and Pipe Creek Holdings LLC at 2330 River Avenue. It is requested the commission by motion provide authorization for me to sign a certification and acknowledgement form indicating the proposed project is not inconsistent with the city's comprehensive development plan or other economic development goals. If approved by the Division of Liquor Control, the D5 permit will be issued without the typical need for the city to consider a hearing. I'd ask for a motion to approve that authorization.
So moved. Liquor license, right?
Yeah.
So moved.
No.
Second.
I missed a little bit.
Got a motion and a second, discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I need to abstain on this particular piece of legislation, so I would request a vote so that I can
We'll have a
abstain.
voice vote. Ms. Myers, will you call roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Motion is passed with one abstention.
Moving on to recreation, Sandusky Rec would like to thank all of the businesses and volunteers who contributed or donated to Spring Break Camp at Mill School. The camp averaged 85 participants each day during the 3-day camp. Also, Mills Creek Golf Course is officially opened and season passes are available for purchase. The Butch Wagner Memorial Golf Tournament is scheduled for Saturday, May 21st, and there are still openings in the afternoon flight of the tournament. Nominations are also being accepted for the Mills Creek Golf Course Hall of Fame. Anyone interested in more information can follow the course on Facebook or call 419-627-5803. That concludes my remarks for this evening. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Questions or comments for the city manager, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
two. One, I've run into a number of folks who play Mills regularly, and they did not know that the city did not own the property for about half the course, and they've been quite supportive of the fact that we've secured the future. So I like that. I didn't know what kind of response we'd get. But I've really found that people are pretty supportive of it. And the second is, there were the Safety Town drawings, there were two different versions, an option 1 and option 2. I kept staring at them, trying to figure out how these fit together. Mr. Poole pointed out option 1 and option 2. So, okay. I hope we find the resources necessary to do the first option, which is the more fulsome option. That's the Safety Town I remember.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I grew up in Huron, and so it was a different place, I suppose. But that's the Safety Town I remember. I'd like to see that.
I see nodding heads from Jason and John, so we will figure that out, I promise. All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I concur with Mr. Murray. That's exactly what we do. If we're going to do this, we should do it right. And the selection, the option that has the roundabout and the more extent. If you're going to teach your kids about biking and all those things, we need to do it right the first time.
You run across that.
So if there's space for it, so thank you.
Additional comments or questions for the city manager? Now we'll move to items of old business. Commissioners, any items of old business?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I see Mr. Orling here tonight. I helped out on the fish turn on Saturday. I played 9 holes golf in the morning, was going to go down and do dump day, and that got averted because you were driving back from Florida. And that's the first time I had to soak my feet in years from the carrying the fish back and forth from the boats up to, and then the guy goes, I feel bad for you, big guy. He throws me a T-shirt, so on the way home, I can see what's on this thing. Well, it's a medium. I wear a medium in about 3rd grade. So I give it to some kid that's on a bike. Here you go, pal. I threw it at a kid.
It was for one of your legs.
Extra.
It was fun, though. We had, 136 boats and 2 guys in a boat, and then all the fish went to our Key to the City recipient from the last meeting, Victor Kitchen, correct? We had a truck there. We took all the fish.
cool.
They weighed them in, ran them in the truck. I think they got cleaned and everything over there, right? So that was all good.
What a great event. Excellent.
No more for me. I'm retired now.
Additional items of old business, Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wadding.
Mrs. Blair's here. Since I haven't heard nothing since our south side, could you, if you don't mind, give us a 60-second, as my mayor always says, Reader Digest version on our meeting at middle school that I thought went really great? We had a nice turnout for that.
Sure. Thank you through the chair to Commissioner Wellington. We had a just initial Southside Plan Steering Committee meeting. We invited about 20 invites. I think we had 12 or 13 attend, mostly residents from the community. Many people have lived there their whole lives, and there was a great discussion talking about how many generations of community members have lived in the South Side for so long. We also have representation from institutions, the schools and the hospital, so the major anchors in the neighborhood. And this was just an early meeting to folks that have been reaching out to us that want to get involved, because we're looking to them to be ambassadors to the planning process. So take the information that they hear there and spread it to those in their family, their friends, and their neighbors. And we're collecting kind of that first information, so then we can launch a really robust community-wide communication process and have big community events and everything. So we hope that we'll meet with this group about 5 times throughout the process. It's not completely finalized, so if anybody out there listening really wants to be part of that group, you can reach out to me. We have a survey live right now where we are taking email addresses, and if folks would like to get involved in a stakeholder conversation, so a focused conversation about a topic, say transportation, housing, recreation, things like that, we're going to be scheduling those in the next few weeks. And we're looking to do a community kickoff event on May 31st. It's a Tuesday evening, so we'll get more details out about that. But anybody answering the survey right now is going to go on our outreach list and get those emails. So thanks for the opportunity to tell you a little bit more. Did I cover what you were hoping to cover?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I left there feeling like you're a good, I shouldn't say replacement, but took the handoff from Mr. Floor, going forward. So I feel confident you can handle it.
I appreciate it. Thank
And
you.
I would think that your enthusiasm for that project is going to grow. The attendance there is what it is, and I would expect that to grow as people tend to talk to their neighbors, and nothing succeeds like a little bit of success.
Thank you. I hope so, and I hope that we continue, as you mentioned, to get the word out, because everyone who wants to be involved in this process is invited.
Sure. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Additional items of old business, Commissioner. Now we'll turn to items of new business. I have one. I must ask you for a motion for a public hearing for CDGB 2022 action plan for 5.09.
So moved.
May the 9th. Got a motion and a second discussion. As far as you poll the commission on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Waddington? Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That public hearing is set for May the 9th. Additional items of new business, Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner,
I almost forgot to mention, on behalf of Rick and Megan Hography and our For Love With Love charity, I am pleased to announce that just a couple weeks ago, we wrapped up our 4th year of grant opportunities to SHS students. Let me see, and that now puts us over roughly about 50 students who we've had the opportunity to provide grants to. This year, as we have in previous years, our goal is to provide 12 grants each year. However, with the thanks of a few community members, such as Ms. Cosetta Poole, Ms. Mary Giles, and Mr. Nico Somniago, because of their generosity, we were actually able to bump that number up to 14 this year. So a major thanks to them. And as we always do every year, we look forward to continuing to provide this opportunity for those students that can benefit most.
Excellent. Additional items of new business, Commissioner? Not, we will turn to public comments on any item that pertains to city business. Please step to the podium, share us your name and address and your thoughts.
I'm Chris Weedle, 403 East Adams. First, I want to thank all you commissioners for donating your time to serve the citizens of Sandusky. I thank you for that. I have two items I'd like to talk to you about tonight. The first is I received a letter from the city of Sandusky about 9 parcels that are to be considered for transient rental. In the letter was just, what was given was just the parcel numbers, so I looked them up. It's 302 through 328 Washington. This is the whole 300 block of Washington, all the way from Franklin down to Hancock. There are 9 properties involved there. First question I had was, did all 9 property orders request to be put into the transient district? And if not, why are all 9 included? A real concern I have is I have a similar facility at 403 East Adams. I was told by the city planning that I had to provide parking. Of these 9 properties, only 3 have parking that is not on city property. So if we're going to have transient rentals, shouldn't there be provisions for that property owner to provide parking for the people that stay there? If it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. You can't pick and choose, which property owner you're going to enforce on. The second item is recently there's been a publication made of the crime statistics of the 100 largest cities in Ohio. 5 years ago, I appeared before this board to tell you about a problem in a neighborhood we were having that had scores of police calls to that residence. And it eventually ended up with a SWAT team on my front porch. Of the 100 largest cities in Ohio, there are only 6 cities that have more crime than Sandusky. I've looked through the minutes of your meeting, and the only thing I can see is hiring police officers to replace retired or leaving police officers. There isn't anything more important to a city or governing body than the safety of its residents. I believe this needs to become an agenda on every single meeting. How are you expecting to build a city when you're almost leading the state in crime? It doesn't work that way. So I hope that becomes an attention of the whole commission. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
May I just inquire of the gentleman, sir, the address, sir, I was trying to look it up on Google Maps in terms of the first comment that you made. I just didn't get it fast enough.
It's 302 to 328 Washington. It's the whole south side of Washington from Franklin up to Hancock.
Thank you.
I would ask that Aaron Blair, our chief planner, get your name and perhaps always has your name or address and contact information and have that discussion with our chief planner and provide you with details and concerns to your questions on the transient rental issue, because I'm certain there's some extenuating circumstance there or must be some reasoning there. And if you feel that is unfair or unjust, I will expect to see you back here.
Thank you.
And I would also ask Chief Oliver to reach out to you and have a serious discussion on your statistics. I don't know what you're using for statistics, but I'm not going to debate you on that. But I know that Chief Oliver has that responsibility and he takes it very seriously. And I would ask him to have that discussion with you also, and I expect you to be back here on that issue too if we're not satisfying you.
Okay. Well, you know, it is one thing for the police chief to be involved in crime. But I believe because of the ongoing nature of this, it has to rise to your level. There has to be something intentional done from the leadership of the city.
I certainly agree with your statement that there is not an issue that this commission will ever entertain that is more important than the safety of our residents and the crime statistics and the crime issues. So I assure you, I believe this commission, I don't mean to speak for my fellow commissioners, but I believe that we take that very seriously and we'll continue to.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. John.
Relative to that transient housing on Washington Street, the gentleman did come before the Planning Commission at our last meeting, and he brought a petition. He said that the petition indicated 70% of the people on that block wanted approved of him going transient rental on his property. We are going to entertain him again on Wednesday night at the Planning Commission meeting, and I would request that you come in and speak your mind on that particular petition, because we're trying to put together processes and procedures, and we need to hear from pros and cons on this transient rental issue.
What time Wednesday night and where?
5 o'clock, right here.
I'll be there.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Poole.
Mr. Bajali, I just thought occurred to me with regard to our legislation. Planning Commissioners, you guys, if you haven't, talk about the concept of these transient rentals providing parking, and just see how that works into the way we do business.
Yes.
That's all. And the other thing with regard to the crime, if you would, when you meet with the police chief, provide him with the data that you have, and Chief, would you send it to us so we know what you're talking about? Just the link that we have to whatever data he gives you, and then get back to, obviously, whatever you guys work out, you can.
Chief Oliver?
What you think about, Chief Oliver?
Yes, sir, if I may, through
Just send it to
Commission
us.
President to the rest. I'm not sure where his statistics came from. We follow the statistics from the FBI and the state reporting system, and those are news to me with this most recent one. But I'll definitely follow up with Mr. Weedle.
And just make sure you send a link to us so that we know. So we're looking at what you're looking at, and then we'll know when you follow up what you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meisner.
I'd like to address both a resident and Ms. Bajali. I mean, I know we have some criteria now, Mr. Holliday, that there is parking off-street required, and when you submit approval for a vacation or a transient rental, you have to provide parking off-street. And, I mean, it goes down to the same when people used to take a single-family home and turn it into a triplex and had no parking for them. So I think there's a lot of criteria that we should develop, that people have hit those bullet points before they're allowed spot zoning, or whatever we're doing, block by block or neighborhood by neighborhood. That should, I think we got to put the parameters in place before we go there. That's just my opinion. And two, I agree 100% with, I'm sorry to get your name, but the resident of Adams Street. I ran for commission because I started to realize that crime and safety was getting out of hand, and there was a point in my career that I thought, this whole town just needs to burn down. It'd be a great place to start a city, and that was 12 years ago. And all of a sudden, people are building homes in here again, people are moving back, and that's the answer to you cannot hire enough police and firefighters to save you from that. Detroit's tried that. There's a lot of big communities that have tried that. So the answer is to try to turn things around. There's a balance, there's a balance. You still have to take care of your weakest link in your society in the meantime, but that's where we all want to get. I think we're all on the same page.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to just speak to the residents' comments just about the crime, and as it relates to it being a priority, not just to the police department, but to this governing body. I think we all would agree that it is an issue that falls on the shoulders of truly every member of this community in some way, shape, or form. And I would like to think that through the government, through our community partners, through our educational institutions, the education, the vocational opportunities, and many other opportunities, that we offer throughout this community perhaps serve as a vehicle or a way to try to curve this, these issues of crime and questions of the spike in crime as we look to further, just continue to be a city of hope and opportunity. And I think with those two things, with the combination of those two things, you can accomplish just that, just creating a safe place, for all of us to, work and play. So, but I thank you again for your concerns.
Additional public comments on any items that pertain to city business?
Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. On the issue of safety services overall, police department, as the gentleman spoke about, I had a conversation back with the assistant city manager back when he was the police chief about employment numbers, the employee numbers for the police department. He told me at that time that today versus when he first came on the force, we're nowhere near what we had on the force back when he first started. The population of Sandusky's gone down, but the incidence of crime is different nowadays than what it was 25 years ago. Most of it's all drug related. And I know we've talked here before about reinstituting the drug task force, Erie County Drug Task Force, Sandusky Drug Task Force, but I still don't think we have anything on that level yet. I'm not really too sure. Maybe somebody can straighten me out when I leave from the podium. The other item is on safety services. I have to hand it to the fire chief and the fire department for finally being able to get something in the contract that's going to get us back to close to the numbers of fire employees that we need. I live out in the west end of town, and a lot of those folks are elderly. I'm not, but most of them are. Trust me, they were very, very concerned with the number of times that number 7 closed. Number 7 was operating without a full staff. All they had was EMS on staff. The fire truck was sitting there, but all they had was EMS. So I got to hand it to those fellas for getting that, and women, for getting that number of 48 now. Is that enough? Probably not, but at least we're not going to be going down below 48 now. Thank you.
Additional comments from the public on any item? Not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.